Okay, everyone. Well, it is 4 o'clock. I want to welcome you to our last session of Maximizing Farm Profits. I want to thank you all for going along with this series, and I hope you found it valuable. So tonight we're going to have Drew McCulley, and he's going to be talking with us about protecting your gross margin on your farm, and he is with Global Ag Risk Solutions. So as always, if you do have any questions while he's talking, try and type them in the chat box, and then at the end we'll have a lot more time to unmute and discuss anything. So with that, I will hand it over to Drew and we can get started.
All right, thank you, everybody. I appreciate Purdue letting me speak tonight. I think we've got some good stuff to cover. I am Drew McCulley, and I am the Regional Sales Manager for Global Ag Risk Solutions, and we are a company that specializes in protecting farm revenues, especially gross margin. And today we're going to go into a little deeper dive on the farm side of gross margin and how that works. So to begin that, we'll advance these slides here, maybe. There we go. I wanted to talk about some key takeaways from the last few series that we've listened to. I asked the other presenters some questions, and I pulled some from Ryan Smith's presentation, but one thing that we heard from Dr. Langmeyer was decline in corn and soybean prices and subsequent decline in potential working capital. That is a huge thing on farms. I'm on a lot of farms, and if they have any kind of working capital, it's not very much. So the next one here is why don't we sell? Each summer, the reason the market rallies is because your crop is struggling and it will be destroyed by next week's heat wave. How often does 2012 or 1988 happen? Ryan Smith with CIE. All-time high values of prime farmland. Peak in 13-14, still in the 80th percentile today. That's Howard Halderman Real Estate. Here's some more. There were several that I brought on, but here's another one from Dr. Langmeyer. The decline in working capital has been going on for several years now, but it is reaching critical levels this year. Depending on the level of coverage and yields, revenue insurance does not always cover the drop in crop prices. That one's important, and we'll get into that later, but that's one that the working capital has been going down and down since probably 2007, and guys are trying to find ways to continue to farm and trying to essentially get skinny with their budget. So the next one here is where are land values going? Depends on farm incomes, interest rates, and supply. How he built upon that was if farm incomes continue to grow, interest rates stay low, then there will be opportunity to buy land. If farm incomes continue to go down, what will happen is if guys have to liquidate land, there's going to be an oversupply on the market. We all know that it's supply and demand. So if there's more ground that's available to buy, obviously those prices will trend downwards as well. So just something to keep in mind as we go forward. And another one here from Ryan Smith is each May, June, and July, the last 12 years, growers have been able to sell $4 corn or higher for old and new crop. I thought that was pretty interesting. That's one I hear. Guys are always kind of watching the markets this time of year, and always seems to be a nice little rally in May, June, July. So those facts went along with what he said. On our webinar series, I'm going to outline what's going on here. First, we're going to talk about gross margin. What is it? You may not know on your farm what gross margin is. We're going to tell you. We're going to tell you how to protect that gross margin. We're going to talk about transferring risk off the farm. And then we're going to talk about being progressive and aggressive on your farm at the same time. The guys that are going that direction, the guys that want to be progressive and aggressive are the guys that want to continue to do the best they can for the crop and continue to grow, whether that be being a better farmer, whether that be in a better business, whether that be in picking up more ground, farming better with the ground you have. Those things all go together. So I've got some interesting questions here. These are usually how I start out talking with a grower. If everybody take out a piece of paper and I want you to write down the answers for these questions just so you have them on paper. So the first one is, if you had 30 seconds, what would you tell me about your farm? Most guys tell me who's involved, how many acres are involved, what kind of crops they grow, if they grow any kind of specialty crops, if we grow waxy corn, non-GMO beans, so on and so forth. So everybody take a minute to write down the answer to that. If I was coming up to your farm gate, what would you tell me about your farm if you had to in 30 seconds? The next question is, this is a kind of a question that gets a little deeper in thought, and I hope that most of the guys that I go and meet with have either talked about this, have it written down somewhere, or this is always on the top of their mind. What are the 3, 5, and 10-year goals for your farm? This could be, hey, in 3 years, we want to maximize our fertility program. In 5 years, we would like to grow by so many acres. 10-year goal is that all the ground that we own be systematically tiled. It's good to have these things written down. Unfortunately, there's a few farms I go to that I get kind of a blank stare when I ask what the goals of the farm are. So it really helps us understand more about your farm and how we can help on what we're trying to do if we know where you want to go long term. And the last one is, what's things that are keeping you up at night? Guys usually try and give me a smart answer on this one, but really, I think the number one answer that I get is, Drew, I planted a crop and I don't know what's out there. That seems to be the number one answer that I get from guys, that there's farmers seem to be hopelessly optimistic when it comes to if there's going to be a crop or not. So those are just some of those things. Make sure you jot those down just for your own benefit. I'm not going to call anybody or want to know anybody. If they're trying, or if somebody would like to, they can for sure let me know. But those are just some things I try and get some talking points when we go to a farm, instead of just rolling out there and offering, showing what our offerings are. So now we're going to talk about gross margin. Gross margin, the true definition, mathematically, how we figure gross margin on your farm. So think of total revenue on your farm. So total revenue pays for everything. That's going to pay for vacations. That pays for the wife's new car. That pays for T-ball pictures. Okay. We subtract out inputs of seed, chemical, and fertilizer, and that equals gross margin. So what's the big deal about gross margin? Gross margin pays for all the fixed costs on your farm. So labor, power, machinery, land, building, and finance. Those are the things that are going to be costs on your farm that need to be paid, whether you get a seed in the ground or not. So when we think about fixed cost, we think about the guys that work for us. We think about the machinery that we have payments on. We think about land and taxes. We think about the building that we may or may not have put up in the last 5 or 10 years. Then you got to compound that with finances. So all these things that have to be paid, whether you guys put a crop in the ground or not, is what gross margin pays for. So let's talk about, how do we increase gross margin? First, to increase revenues on the farm, we got to produce more bushels. Now, in theory, that seems like it could be a pretty achievable goal. But the problem is, to increase bushels, we have to take on more risk on the farm. I spent a lot of years in ag retail, and unfortunately, guys get I guess it'd be a financial block of how they want to increase bushels, because instead of trying to increase bushel size, or bushels that they're producing, what they try and do is they try and get skinny on their budget. They try and save themselves into prosperity. I can tell you with 10 years of ag retail experience that cutting fertilizer, it does not have a direct correlation to producing more bushels. It actually, what it does when you do something like that on your farm, it actually makes your cost of production go up. So what guys don't understand they're doing is, when they start to cut fertilizer, instead of making the fertilizer or making more bushels, they're actually increasing their cost because they're producing less bushels. We here at Global Ag Risk Solutions, what you'll hear me call GARS from here on out, we have a risk transfer tool that's available to you as a producer, and it's called production cost insurance. This is how it works. So we insure all inputs applied. So seed, chemical, and fertilizer. Think of everything that goes in, on, or around your corn, your soybeans, your lentils, your canola, wheat, any of that stuff. Basically, we cover that, and then we figure out via some math, that math I showed you, the total revenue minus inputs equals gross margin. We figure out what your gross margin is, and then we make you an offer of insurance based off of that gross margin. So here's how this kind of works. This is a little bit of a busy slide, but I'm going to walk you through it. I think everybody should be able to see my mouse here. We'll start over here on the left. So a 3,000 acre farmer qualifies and purchases for $350 of gross margin coverage. What that means is that he probably had a gross margin of about $400 an acre, and we made him an offer of insurance for $350. So we can't take all the risk on the farm because that's not a good business plan for us. But what we can do is taking a portion of that risk for the farmer. So what we're doing, cannot see the cursor. Okay, we'll see what we can do here. All right, well, we start over here on the left. The next one down is 100% coverage of inputs. So this particular guy, you see the bold there, the $250 per acre. That's what they told us they were going to. That's what they told us we were going to spend, basically, in a season. So what we do is combine. Think about two buckets on your farm. The first bucket's going to be all your fixed cost. So everything in that bucket, I'm going to make an offer of insurance for a particular amount of that bucket. The second bucket is going to be your input side. I cover 100% of that bucket. So in this scenario, there's $250 per acre that this guy's going to spend. He tells us projection he's going to spend on inputs. So we slide down into the bottom left-hand corner. We got a 3,000 acre grower, and then you take 350 plus 250 would be $600 an acre. So if we multiply that together in quick math, that's $1.8 million. Essentially, what we just did was I created a revenue floor for this farm of $1.8 million. So in theory, if said farmer signed up with a policy for today, that means that he would know in basically July of 2020 what he would be guaranteed to make in December of 2021. So obviously crops on the ground this year, so we can't make him offer of insurance to this step right now. But for next season, we can go ahead and we can start writing these policies for these guys as early as August. So what that means is we talked about being progressive and aggressive. I look at this of how aggressive you could be agronomically and how aggressive you could be on the marketing side if you knew today what you're going to make, 15, 16 months from now. So now let's go over here to this the middle section here. Before we jump into that, I want to talk and do a little separation here of federal multi-peril and what we do. We're not associated with a government in any way. Well, we're a private company, but let's talk about how this coverage is different from what you're used to. So what I run into is guys have a revenue protection line on their farm, and they know what that line is. So as we work through the season, guys spend almost up to that line, and then right before they get to that line, they stop farming. I remember back in my retail days, I would go and see somebody in June or July. We'd be talking about fungicide or an insecticide pass or doing some fertility stuff on soybeans. Well, at the time, I did not realize that this is how guys tend to farm. The federal program has been the only program for about 40 years, and unfortunately, it has been a risk management tool. And like I said, it's been the only tool, and what it has done is taught guys to stop farming. I sold a heck of a lot more fertile or fungicide in December than I ever did in June or July. The reason was when we get to a position in the summer where it hasn't rained for 3 days and there's not rain in the forecast for another 3, what happens is guys decide that, hey, we're just going to hang her up. We're not going to throw good money after bad, and we're going to hope for some kind of weather event and we can collect a check. What happens is there's two types of insurance payments out there. The first one, we're going to talk about frequency. So the federal multi-peril program is frequency. It's a bunch of little checks. You can catch a replant check, you can catch a prevent plant check, and you might catch a hail check somewhere in there. So what happens there is guys have stopped farming so that they can turn around and try and catch one of those checks. I understand. A lot of insurance agents' premise is that, hey, I'm going to sell you some insurance and we're going to try and get your premium back. So what guys are trying to do is recoup that premium instead of going for it on the agronomics. So we go back to the center section here. Let's say we get into season and something comes up. We got tar spot. We've got, if you're in northern Indiana, the tar spots become a big deal. If you're in southern Indiana or some other states, that southern rust might blow in. So what happens is you've got to make a decision for your crop in season that you maybe didn't plan on before. So, and you figure, well, while we're out there, let's go ahead and throw an insecticide with it. Let's do a little bit of extra nitrogen. So with what we do here at Global Agri Solutions, because we cover 100% of your inputs. So if you've got to spend an additional $50 an acre, like this math says here, what that is, if you take that 650 now times 3,000 acres, that's $1.9 million in coverage. What we did is as your risk grows on the farm throughout the season, so does your insurance policy, and we don't charge you more premium for that. The reason is because we want you to farm like you want to farm, and we don't want to tie your hands or micromanage what you're doing. We want you to do what's best for the crop. So let's go back to putting on a fungicide for whatever reason. When you bought a certain variety back in the wintertime, your seed guy sold it to you with the intentions of, hey, this has a very high response rate to fungicide. Well, if it doesn't, if you're not going to do it, then I wouldn't have bought that type of seed. So now we get into season, so you've got to decide whether it's worth not spending that $25 on the fungicide application, or is it return on investment? We talk about there's two fears in farming. The first fear is, what if I don't spend that money? And a lot of guys go down that avenue. If I don't spend that money, I don't have that risk, and then I'm not going to throw my good money after bad. The second fear, which is the bigger fear in farming, is what if I do everything that my retail guy or my consultant tells me to do and it doesn't rain? What then? I don't have a return on my investment. So as you can see, what we're doing here, because this policy continues to grow with you through the season, you're always going to be covered no matter what you do on the input side. That gross margin side is not going to change. That's a stagnant number, but the insurance can grow with you. Now, on the flip side of that, let's say you get into the first part of July and you just continue and you quit. You stop spending money and you quit farming. What happens is that since we cover 100%, that $250 may be only $200. So it fluctuates with you on how you farm. We encourage everybody never to stop farming, and we encourage everybody to think about how to farm like it's perfect. So if we go over here to the far right, if you think about, we'll get to the end of the year, and the farm's actual crop revenue turns out to be $1.45 million due to a combination of any of these here: drought, flood, hail, wind, frost, lightning, excessive rain, snow. I always like toss the hurricane here in Indiana, tornadoes, accidental fire, insects, plant disease, or heating a crop in permanent storage. So not the silage bags, but the actual a grain silo gets warm, that's covered because we assume that you were going to sell that crop. You weren't going to feed it to the deer. And the price that you receive for your grain. So all of this is what we're trying to do, is to get you to that 1.95 million. And you always want to go for it, because at the end of the day, bad breath is better than no breath. Okay. So we look down here at our math underneath that, $1.95 million. We close the books at $1.45 million. That gives you a payout of $500,000. We talked about frequency. Now we're going to talk about severity. So when a guy hits and has a claim with us, it's usually pretty severe because he never stopped farming. Two, he did what was right for the crop. And if something happens like this, we got you on the backside. So that's, in a nutshell, all I'm trying to do is to get you to farm yourself to your level or above, because we're here not to sell you a county policy or something easy that's based on everybody else in the county. This is based on how you run your farm. And what we want to do is we want to get you into a better business position because we're looking long term. We ask you about your 3, 5, and 10-year goals because we want to know what you're doing in 10 years because we want to help you get there. So going to this next slide. So I want to show you guys how the actual policy grows with you through the season and how it acts during the season. So this planning session right here. So this is your fixed cost. This is everything that you guys put into labor, power, machinery. This is everything that goes into all that stuff that has to be paid for, no matter if you get a crop in the ground or not. So that risk on this farm is a little over $1 million. So what we did is we made this guy an offer of insurance. So everything in the green here, that's what the insurance policy is going to cover, which means that little bit in the red there is $150,000. So if you pay attention to these numbers at the top as I go through this, you're going to see how the risks change. You're going to see what the total risk is. So on this particular guy, if you take the 3,000 acres, that red essentially is $50 an acre. So that's what the skin in the game, so to speak, that the grower has when he has an insurance policy from us. Now, these all vary based on how the finances look and how we come up to a quote. But in this particular example, this farmer's on the hook for $50 an acre. So that's what his skin in the game is in this particular scenario. So let's get into planting. So now that we cover 100% of your inputs as well, now that risk has grown to $1.5 million. So this is seed, this is starter, this is everything else that goes with that. This is where we start stacking stuff up on top of that gross margin. So you'll notice that his total risk went to $1.5 million and his risk stayed the same at $150,000 because that stagnant number with his gross margin, and we keep moving up dollar for dollar on his input side. So here comes the herbicide. It doesn't matter what your particular flavor is. If you like Helix GT, if you like Matador on your soybeans, whatever you want to use, I would like you to use the best of the best. I've heard some numbers over the years that for every 1 inch of weed competition, that's 0.2 bushel off. So why wouldn't we want to spend the best to do what we can to mitigate that risk in the field from the weed pressure by using the best chemistries? So as that risk continues to go, you'll notice that we're at $1.8 million now, and the total risk is $150,000 still. So fungicides, my favorite part of the season. Like we talked about earlier, trying to sell fungicides in the middle of summer is probably one of the worst ideas I ever had. If I could get guys on board, my early adopters, my guys that it became automatic with, we would do that in December, and it was always going to go on. But if any kind of weather event, we had a late start to the summer, we had any kind of planting, it was wet, it was dry, whatever it was, fungicides and the foliar packages were usually the first thing to get kicked out. So at this point now, you made a commitment to buy seed that may be responsive to a fungicide package. Why wouldn't you use it? So this is where that risk continues to grow for a guy. He's almost at $2 million in risk. So now we keep going. So here we go, our extra pass. Let's say that along with being very susceptible or very responsive to a fungicide pass, and it's a nitrogen hog. So we're going to go and Y drop some corn in there. We're going to drop some insecticide in there while we're doing it. Guess what? That risk is now at $2.1 million. Everything in the green is what the policy covers as it grows with the guy over the season. The risk has stayed the same, $50 an acre, $150,000 total. So now we get into harvest. So there's that same risk. So as you look in the planting stages of a crop all the way to harvest, that $150,000 has continued to be the same risk. No more risk is associated to the farmer. That risk gets transferred off the farm onto this insurance policy. So we go into harvest. We have a great harvest. So guys get hung up on getting a check. And at the end of the day, it's not about how much you get paid by insurance. It's how much you make at the end of the year. It's how many bushels you come up with, okay? So what we want you to do is, instead of looking at an insurance policy on the way to get your premium back, why don't we take a insurance policy and use that as an investment tool to help you farm and help you market the way you want to farm and market. So on the flip side of that, let's say Mother Nature comes in and she does what she does. It's hot, it's dry, she's finicky, and harvest is poor. What that means is everywhere above the harvest there in the green, that's going to be what we would call your indemnification. What we're going to do is we're going to bring you back up to that level that your risk is at $150,000. So everything in the green, we talked about severity, that's what would happen. So basically what we're going to talk about now is that your policy is underwritten based on farm financials. I get some guys that might want to bristle up about this. Basically, what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at your Schedule Fs. We're going to take a look at your balance sheets. We're going to take a look at forward contracted grain. What we're going to do is do that for 5 years of history. And the reason we do that is we want to come up with an average to you to make you the best offer of insurance we can. And I get all the time guys say, oh, I'm not going to share my financials. That's fine. The reason we want to see your financials is because we're going to potentially make you an offer of insurance for millions of dollars to your farm and could be a good portion of your operating loan. And we got to do the same thing the bank does. We got to take a look under the hood and see how everything runs. All revenue is net of basis. So with our stuff, there is no discovery periods. There's no Chicago Board of Trade pricing. Our math for total revenue is yield times price. So whatever you grow times whatever you sell it for. I don't care if you sell your corn for 100 different prices. We're going to find the average price of your total revenue, and we're going to bring that in to make you an offer of insurance. Hedging gains and losses are covered within the policy if in a claim situation. This is a huge one, guys. So I listened to Mr. Smith speak the other night on forward marketing grain, doing contracts, everything else. I go and I see a lot of farms and I ask them pinch points. And one of the pinch points, other than I don't know what's out there, is marketing. And the reason they don't market is because they don't know what's out there. So they miss out on opportunities to capture great pricing because they're afraid of what's going on. We talked about those fears. We talked about those financial hangups that the guy's got in the back of his head. What we do is we cover hedging gains and losses as part of the revenue line. So what that means is if you go out and market, let's say 100,000 bushels of corn, Mother Nature steps in, something happens, we can only come up with 75,000 bushels. So essentially that 25,000 bushels that was on contract, you got to buy that back from the elevator. Some of them will do you a favor and roll that basis over for you to the next year. Particularly, probably not what you want to do, but they'll do it with a handshake and go on. So if you end up where you can't fill a contract, that's loss of revenue. We count that as part of the insurance policy. So it encourages you to go forward on the marketing side. We talked about being aggressive. We talked about being progressive. Be progressive on your agronomy, be aggressive on your marketing. Within our product, there's 4 different versions of production cost insurance, or PCI, to fit your needs of your farm. This is not a cookie cutter approach. If I went to every farmer in the county that I'm in now, I would have as many farmers there. I'd have that many different offers of insurance. Nobody would be the same. And we make different versions of that so we can fit the needs of your farm. We're not out there selling you a percentage. We're not out there selling you parts, different little gimmick stuff that goes along with this. We're actually looking at your finances, and what we're going to do is make you the top and best offer of insurance we can so that you're able to, like we've been saying, be progressive and aggressive with your farm. So this is kind of a busy slide, but there's 2 numbers I want you to focus on. In the middle of the first graph on the left, there is a number that says 9%. So the average size farm who has farmed with Global Ag-Risk Solutions for the last 5 years have increased both their inputs and their gross margin by acre. On the left here, 9%. So 9% is the amount of inputs, more inputs, a guy's going to spend when he's got this policy. 1, because we cover 100% of that risk. He's always going for it. He never stops. 2, it becomes automatic. So when you have somebody out scouting your crops and they tell you you've got insects here, you've got disease starting over here, yeah, it may not be threshold, but it becomes automatic on your farm. The guys that understand how this works, when it's time to spray fungicide, it all gets sprayed. When it's time to do a foliar pass, it's all getting sprayed. When it's time to do the fertility, that's what happens. We use the best of the best. Now we shift over here to the far right. There's that 14% right in the middle. Let's talk about that. So 14% is the amount of increase in gross margin per acre that a guy that uses this policy over 5 years has. Now, since our policy is written on financial data and we collect that, we've got some almost 20,000 years of financial data that we run this against. So these numbers just aren't pulled out of a hat. This is from actual guys who gave us financial data, and we can see year over year because we look at their finances each year. 14%, that is net what it costs to have this insurance policy. So what that means is that guys are putting 14% more money in their pocket at the end of the year. Something that I think everybody would be interested in my opinion. So here's some stuff to remember. Your policy is underwritten based on your farm's financials. We take a peek under the hood, we see how you run the business, we look at your gross margin, and we help make a fit for you so we can make the top and best offer of insurance to your farm. All revenues are net of basis, so there's no discovery periods or Chicago Board of Trade pricing. We want you to go and farm. So what that means is instead of sticking stuff in the bin, we go market it and farm it like it's perfect. How many times do we not make 70 or 80% of our APH in a given year? And if you don't, we got you on the backside. So PCI provides a full crop revenue floor, giving you the freedom to make the best decisions for your farm. So what that means is that when you know in, let's say, August of 2020, what your total revenue is going to be in December of 2021, there's a lot of stuff you could do in between there. You could be taking advantage of early discounts on seed. You can buy early on your inputs. That revenue floor is very helpful when it goes into doing a crop plan. The policy can be used with your bank to increase loan ratios, free up cash, and expand your operation. Let's break that down. So when we come out and make you an offer of insurance, I have a spreadsheet that I plug all your stuff into. And at the far right of that spreadsheet, there's some numbers that are in red. What those numbers in red are is to the penny what your risk is, what you're going to be on the hook for as a grower. And as we step down through the offers of insurance, that risk grows. And what we do is try and figure out what you're comfortable with. Essentially, I'm going to ask you, how much money can you lose and still come back and farm next year? So to do this with your bank, you can use this as collateral instead of ground, because you're going to know to the penny how much that insurance policy is worth. Your banker would like to see that a lot. I think you and your banker would probably have a better relationship if you had an insurance policy that was back up to an operating loan instead of putting up ground for collateral. So how that's going to free up cash for you is you're not hoarding cash back in the bank account all summer in case nothing's out there. What that means is you can do capital projects. You've got more money for that. And if you got to go back and get a little extra more on your operating loan mid-season so that you're able to do the things you want to do, we've got to do some extra stuff. Well, guess what? As that insurance policy grows with you, your banker won't be afraid to do that. So if we make you, let's say a scenario here, if I make you an offer of insurance and it covers 94% of your operating loan, what that means to your banker is that every dollar he's going to loan you, 94 cents of it is transferred to us. So his risk is on us. So for every dollar, he's got 6 cents that he's invested in. That probably makes the banker sleep better at night. It probably makes you sleep better at night. So just some different ways to use this policy that we've talked about. I wanted to revisit these key takeaways from the webinar series. Here's another one from Dr. Langmeyer. declines in corn and soybean prices, and subsequent decline of potential working capital. Using a production cost insurance policy will help increase production on the farm by taking the fear out of farming. You farm like it's perfect. Instead of trying to save our way into prosperity, working capital is, if there's any, it's very little. So why don't we use, like I said, use this as an investment to produce more bushels, market them better, and now we've got an increase in gross margin, which leads to more working capital. Farm every year like it's perfect. If it's not, we've got you on the backside. Why don't we sell? Each summer, the reason the market rallies is because your crop is struggling and will be destroyed by next week's heat wave. How often does 2012 or 1988 happen? So with PCI, we talked about hedging gains and losses are covered in the policy. I'm sorry, but chasing basis is something that your grain bin salesman told you about, and that's not the way to market. To tell you that, hey, if we save 2 or 3 cents here, we can pay for the bin in so many years, that's not a very aggressive strategy. Let's go out and really market. Let's use these guys that really understand the market, because 9 times out of 10, the average grower is not going to outguess the guys in Chicago. They do it full time. They look at the screen 18 hours a day. I don't know a farmer that can do that. So going to the last one here, where are land values going? We talked about depending on farm incomes. Farm incomes go up, interest rates stay down, the supply is going to be limited. So that means that it's going to go up. If farm incomes continue to go down, interest rates could either stay down or go up. It doesn't matter. But if guys got to liquidate land to stay afloat, there's going to be a large supply of land come on. And what happens then is that we're going to be in a position where we know how supply and demand works. If there's a lot of supply and low demand, those prices are going to be pretty low. So when you transfer the risk off the farm using our policy, you free up cash for capital purchases like doing land or systematic tiling. Everybody always farms the Johnson farm or the Anderson farm or the Smith farm. Everybody's got a farm like that they rent or own. What they do is they call it the name of the guy that owned it before them. You don't want to be that guy. Nobody wants to be the last guy that farms that runs the farm. So as we go through here to the next slide, how to learn more about protecting your farm's gross margin. We can set up an appointment with your local GARS advisor. We've got some here in Indiana. We're working with some guys in Ohio and Michigan. So you can check out our website. It's www.comparecropinsurance.com. And from there, we'll go ahead and we can unmute everybody. I'm going to leave my contact information up here for the last slide. So if anybody wants to get in contact with me or has questions they don't want to ask in front of everybody else, we can go from there. So I guess we will open this up to questions if I can get this thing to open right. All right, I don't see any questions, Stephanie.
Okay, if no one has any questions for Drew at this point, we can go ahead and wrap up. Thank you, Drew, very much for your presentation this evening. Again, I hope you all found this 4-series session that we did very helpful and insightful, and had some good takeaways and made some good contacts here for any future questions you may have. So with that, I would like to remind you that I will be sending out another survey, and I have appreciated so much your responses. We've gotten some really good feedback on doing things differently and where to go from here, and possibly doing things like this again in the future. So if you guys don't have any questions, we can go ahead and conclude this, and I hope to see you all again next time if we do this again. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Drew.
Thank you.